It started on a quiet Friday night in San Jose, May 14th, 2004. Lauren Vega, 34, founder and CEO of NexGrid Systems, left her office just after 10:40 p.m. She was the kind of executive people either admired or feared, brilliant, relentless, and about to take her cybersecurity company public. 30 minutes later, her silver Audi A6 was found nose down in the Guadalupe River, headlights still glowing through the rain. The engine ran, the wipers moved, but Lauren was gone. Inside the car, her coat, lunchbox, and ID. Missing, her laptop, her phone, and the contract she'd been carrying that night. Police called it an accident, until they noticed there were no skid marks, no crash impact, and no reason for her to stop. Two people were questioned, her CFO, Evan Pierce, accused of embezzling funds, and her co-founder, Maya Chu, who'd just been forced out of the company. Both had motives. Both denied everything. But the truth, buried for over a decade, would reveal a killer no one ever suspected, and a secret Silicon Valley tried hard to erase. If you're still here, you've already stepped into the mystery. What happened on that bridge wasn't an accident. And in part 2, the cracks inside NexGrid start to show. Before you go, hit like to keep her story alive. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part, and share your thoughts. Was it a setup from inside the company, or something bigger watching from outside? Every comment, every view, every share keeps another cold case breathing. We'll see you in part 2. Who she was. Silicon Valley, 2004. A place built on ambition, caffeine, and code, where one good idea could make you a millionaire before sunrise, and one wrong move could erase you just as fast. Lauren Vega was 34, former NSA encryption specialist, founder and CEO of NexGrid Systems, a cybersecurity startup that had grown from a rented garage in San Jose into a company valued at over $200 million. She wasn't just another tech name. She was the story. The woman Forbes called the Firewall Queen. She had built her reputation on one rule: nothing gets through. No data breach, no threat, no weakness. Except, maybe, the ones closest to her. Lauren had left the NSA after a classified internal breach in 1999. She was smart enough to walk away before the fallout and confident enough to start over. Together with two former colleagues, Evan Pierce and Maya Chu, she launched NexGrid, promising a new generation of digital defense systems. 4 years later, NexGrid was on the verge of going public. The company had secured major government contracts, and private investors were fighting for a stake. On paper, everything looked perfect. Inside the company, it was anything but. Lauren was a perfectionist. Her office lights were the last to go dark every night. Deadlines were sacred. Mistakes weren't tolerated. Her staff used to joke that Lauren didn't lead people, she led protocols. But behind that control was exhaustion, fear, and growing resentment. She was the kind of boss who inspired excellence and whispered grudges. Evan Pierce, the CFO, handled NexGrid's financial operations. He was charming in interviews, careful in meetings, and, according to Lauren, reckless with numbers. In early 2004, she discovered a consulting payment worth over $800,000 that didn't match any project on record. Evan called it a clerical error. Lauren called it theft. Maya Chu, her co-founder and longtime friend from NSA days, had helped build NexGrid's first prototypes. But by spring 2004, she was out, quietly pushed off the IPO project after a public argument in front of investors. One former engineer recalled, "They started as friends, but Lauren ran the company like a system, and Maya wasn't a line of code she could control." And outside the company, Lauren's private life was collapsing just as fast. Her husband, David Hollis, a corporate attorney in Palo Alto, had filed for divorce a month before her disappearance. The filings revealed an ugly fight over NexGrid's stock and intellectual property. Friends said Lauren had become guarded, even paranoid. She stopped attending public events, canceled speaking appearances, and once told a colleague, "I can't tell who wants me to win and who wants me gone." The week she vanished, she attended a closed-door meeting with officials from the Department of Homeland Security. They were finalizing a classified cybersecurity contract, one that would give NexGrid access to sensitive federal data and position the company as a key government contractor. But not everyone wanted that deal to happen. Vector Capital, a powerful investment group with ties to one of NexGrid's direct competitors, stood to lose millions if Lauren's company won. They had already backed a rival firm that was bidding for the same contract. That Friday, May 14th, Lauren left the... By every account, Lauren's life was precision. Even her routine was predictable. She left work around 10 each night, drove along Almaden Expressway, crossed the bridge over the river, and headed home to Willow Glen. The night she disappeared, security logs showed the same pattern. But something changed after she started her car. Phone records confirmed one last call at 10:45 p.m., labeled private line. After that, her phone went dark. Investigators later traced the number. It was registered to a private security contractor operating under Vector Capital Security Division. When police began their first round of interviews, 3 names immediately surfaced. Evan Pierce, the CFO she caught moving money. Maya Chu, the co-founder she'd pushed out of the IPO. And David Hollis, the husband fighting for her company's shares. All 3 had motive. All 3 denied contact that night. And all 3, as later evidence would show, were connected, directly or indirectly, to Vector Capital. The truth was already circling her, hidden in plain sight among the people she trusted. Detective Keller would later write in his notes, "Lauren Vega built systems that stopped outsiders from getting in. But she never saw the breach coming from within her own walls." By mid-2004, NexGrid's IPO was delayed indefinitely. The board froze her accounts. The government suspended the DHS contract pending investigation. Everything she had built was unraveling, one document, one rumor at a time. And on the night of May 14th, the night she was supposed to finalize the future of her company, she drove into the dark, carrying secrets that would never make it home. What came next was chaos, an accident scene that made no sense, and an investigation that led nowhere. But before the case went cold, one thing became clear. Lauren Vega wasn't the victim of a random crime. She was the center of something calculated, and someone in her circle knew exactly what they were doing. 1:30 a.m., May 15th, 2004. Rain still fell over San Jose as police sealed off the bridge on Almaden Expressway. The silver Audi A6 sat half-submerged in the Guadalupe River, tilted like it had been placed, not crashed. By dawn, news stations had the story. Tech CEO's car found in river. At first, police treated it as a missing person or an accident. The river was searched for several hours, divers scanning the muddy water, but nothing surfaced. No sign of Lauren, no sign of struggle. The missing items made it harder to explain. Her laptop, her purse, and her phone were gone. The car battery was still running, but her keys were missing too. Rain had erased any footprints or tire marks. By sunrise, Keller's gut told him what the scene didn't. This wasn't random. "It's too clean," he said quietly. "Either she planned it, or someone else did." Within 48 hours, the focus shifted from the river to the company she ran. NexGrid Systems was no ordinary startup. It dealt in high-security software and government data protection. If anyone had enemies, it was Lauren Vega. The police arrived at the NexGrid offices that Monday morning. The place was spotless. Computers locked, doors secured, lights off. Evan Pierce, the CFO, greeted them in a dark suit, calm and rehearsed. He said he'd left around 8 after a routine budget meeting. "I went home early," he told Keller. "I didn't even know she was still in the office." His tone didn't waver once. Maya Chu, co-founder and once Lauren's closest ally, was the opposite. Nervous, emotional, eyes red from lack of sleep. She admitted they had argued the week before. "We fought about the IPO, but I wasn't there that night," she said. Her phone records confirmed she'd been in Mountain View for dinner with a friend. The engineers painted a darker picture. One said, "That place was toxic. Everyone was afraid of her. You cross Lauren, you're done." Another whispered, "She was planning to fire someone big." Keller asked to access NexGrid's internal servers to check work logs and entry records. IT said the security system had crashed the night Lauren disappeared. Power surge, they claimed. But the backup drives showed no error logs, only a manual wipe around midnight. "Someone wanted that footage gone before sunrise," Keller wrote in his report. With each lead, the case tightened around 2 people. Pierce. Then there was the husband. David Hollis, a corporate attorney in Palo Alto, filed for divorce a month before Lauren disappeared. Court filings showed an aggressive battle over NexGrid's shares. When police interviewed him, he was composed, even helpful. He said he'd spent the night of May 14th at a Carmel resort with a legal associate. Resort logs confirmed it. But Keller found something that didn't fit. A $10,000 transfer from Hollis's account to a private security firm called Vector Security Consulting, just 2 days before the disappearance. When asked, Hollis said it was for background checks related to the divorce. The statement was plausible, but hollow. Keller couldn't link Vector to Lauren's death, not yet. Still, he underlined the name twice in his notes. Then came the witness. A taxi driver called in after seeing the morning news. He said he'd been driving across Almaden Bridge around 11:10 p.m. and noticed a silver car stopped near the railing and a dark SUV idling behind it. He thought it was a breakdown and kept driving. The rain blurred everything. He couldn't see faces or license plates. City traffic cameras from that section caught nothing clear. The footage was grainy, smeared with glare. Only 2 headlights cutting through the storm, one small, one large. The police guessed it might have been a black Ford Expedition. No registered vehicle from any suspect matched that description. Days passed, then weeks. Without a body, without fingerprints, there was nothing to hold. The press turned the mystery into a national obsession. CNN, Wired, TechCrunch. Everyone wanted a story. Headlines screamed, "The Firewall Queen vanishes." Talk shows speculated about secret government work, insider sabotage, corporate espionage. Some said she'd run away to escape pressure. Others believed she'd been silenced over the DHS contract. Inside NexGrid, panic grew. The board froze operations, canceled the IPO, and announced temporary closure. Employees scattered to other companies. The woman who built an empire in 4 years was now reduced to rumor and myth. Keller tried to keep the case alive. He pushed to investigate Vector Capital, the firm that had invested in NexGrid. By the end of 2005, all three primary suspects had vanished from public view. Evan Pierce sold his shares, left California, and went silent. Maya Chu founded a small software consultancy and refused interviews. David Hollis remarried. He never spoke about his ex-wife again. And as the headlines faded, so did the hope of closure. Keller's final entry in the 2005 report was short, almost resigned. No body. No weapon. No closure. Only the river remembers. 2 months later, that river spoke. And what it gave back changed everything. It was July 22, 2004. 70 days since the night Lauren Vega disappeared. Two fishermen working near the shallow edge of San Francisco Bay saw something tangled beneath an old bridge piling. At first, they thought it was a bundle of nets. When the current shifted, they saw a pale shape and called the police. When the recovery team arrived, the scene was quiet except for the hum of engines and the sound of water slapping against metal. Wrapped in nylon mesh and electrical cord was the body of a woman. Her clothes were mostly gone. Her watch stopped at 10:57 p.m., and a bracelet with the initials LV clung to her wrist. It didn't take long to confirm what everyone already feared. It was her. News stations broke the story within the hour. The river has spoken. Detective Ryan Keller drove back to the site he'd searched 2 months earlier. He stood at the same guardrail where her car had been pulled from the water. This time, there was no accident theory left to defend. He wrote one line in his notebook. It wasn't the current that took her. It was someone who knew how to hide her. The autopsy was conducted at the Santa Clara County Medical Examiner's office. The findings were clear. Cause of death: asphyxiation, manual strangulation. There was no water in her lungs. She hadn't drowned. She was already dead before she hit the river. The bruising around her wrists suggested restraint. The pressure marks on her neck showed she was strangled by hand. No sign of robbery. Keller's team expanded overnight. What began as a missing person case was now a full homicide investigation. But the more people join, the less direction it had. They started where they left off, the suspects. Evan Pierce, the CFO, was questioned again. Detectives found a hotel receipt in Cupertino dated the same night as his dinner alibi. The times overlapped. If the receipt was right, he could have left the dinner early and no one would have noticed. Rumors spread that he staged the restaurant appearance to build an alibi. Maya Chu, Lauren's former co-founder, became a media target. Reporters camped outside her home. Someone threw bottles at her door. She received death threats from anonymous accounts calling her a traitor. During an interview, she said, "She built a fortress and forgot people have keys." The line was clipped and turned into a viral meme across tech forums. It made her look bitter, guilty, and cold, even if it wasn't true. Then came David Hollis, the estranged husband. He refused every interview. He didn't attend the funeral. A journalist discovered he'd represented Vector Capital, the same investment firm tied to NexGrid's competitors, in a legal deal the previous year. Keller noted the connection in his case file. Lines crossing where they shouldn't. 3 suspects, 3 motives, 0 proof. Meanwhile, the missing items still haunted the investigation. Lauren's laptop, wallet, and the classified DHS contract draft were nowhere to be found. The NexGrid server remained wiped clean. Forensics couldn't recover anything useful. Bank records showed she withdrew $5,000 in cash 2 days before her disappearance. No one knew why. A new witness came forward, a maintenance worker who swore he saw a black SUV parked across from NexGrid around 10:30 p.m. the night she vanished. Police retrieved traffic camera data, but the footage was corrupted, only streaks of light. Keller wrote in his notes, "Whoever planned this understood time, cameras, and erasure." By August, the case was spinning into chaos. Reporters built theories faster than police could debunk them. 3 dominant stories took hold. Corporate murder. That Lauren. Every network had its own version. A talk show branded it the Silicon Valley Conspiracy. Online forums turned the case into entertainment. Fake sightings in Mexico, claims that the body was switched, wild accusations against anyone who'd ever worked with her. By early 2005, the investigation started to fall apart. The homicide unit split over direction. Half believed the answer lay in Vector Capital, the money trail. The other half thought Keller was chasing ghosts. The FBI declined to intervene, calling it a state matter with no federal evidence. Budget cuts hit the department that springs. Staff were reassigned. Keller was pulled from the case, reassigned to fraud investigations. 2 detectives were left to handle what had become one of California's most talked-about murders. His final memo before being removed read, "They want a body count, not a truth count." Behind the scenes, corporate lawyers tightened control of the narrative. Vertical Capital released a statement denying any involvement. They hired one of San Francisco's top defense firms to block subpoenas. Then, an anonymous tip reached the newsroom of the San Jose Chronicle. A meeting between Vector representatives and David Hollis, just 2 weeks before Lauren's death. There were no records, no minutes, but the timing was explosive. The next day's headline read, "Follow the money or follow the marriage." Within 48 hours, the police department issued an internal order. No release of unverified details. Files were sealed. Interviews were canceled. Leads went quiet. Keller confided to a colleague off record, "It's not just a murder case anymore. It's politics. And politics is where the truth died." By 2006, no new evidence surfaced. NexGrid dissolved, its assets quietly sold to a larger cybersecurity firm. The DHS contract draft vanished from government archives. The case that once filled front pages was now a line in the cold case database. Lauren's family sued the city for negligence, claiming investigators failed to protect evidence. The lawsuit failed. A year later, they stopped calling the police. Keller, now assigned to another division, still drove past the bridge once a year. He'd park his car near the guardrail and stare at the water, and just like that, the investigation fell silent. Years would pass. Technology would evolve, but the silence around her death would stay exactly the same. By 2008, the Vega case had a new label, Cold Case. The evidence box, marked 04-1972, was sealed and sent to storage at the Santa Clara Police Department. Inside it sat a formatted server backup, the crash report, photos of the Almaden Bridge, and the autopsy file. The investigation wasn't closed. It was simply put on a shelf. The media had moved on. A brief mention appeared in a Wired special called Tech Deaths Unsolved. Then nothing. Blogs that once dissected every clue now chased the rise of Facebook and the iPhone. The name Lauren Vega faded from headlines, replaced by IPOs and billion-dollar valuations. The people at the center of it all drifted away. Evan Pierce, the CFO once accused of embezzlement, left California and resurfaced in Austin, with a new job and a new lawyer who handled every press request. Maya Chu, the ousted co-founder, launched a small startup and deleted her social media after months of online harassment. And David Hollis, the husband, remarried in 2011 and stopped returning calls from detectives. His divorce file was sealed. Whatever was in it stayed buried. The homicide unit shifted focus. They chased fresh cases, the ones with living witnesses and physical evidence. Cold cases were left to a part-time unit with 2 detectives and no budget. The Vega file didn't meet the solvable within 90 days requirement. It sat untouched. Ryan Keller retired early in 2012, a casualty of department cutbacks. But he couldn't let go. He kept copies of his notes and the full timeline on a personal drive. The 10:45 p.m. call, the missing camera window, the hotel receipt from Pierce, the financial ties between Hollis and Vector Capital. He wrote in red ink, "It's not lack of evidence. It's lack of connection." Over the next few years, meanwhile, the story refused to die completely. 3 theories kept echoing across blogs and podcasts: a corporate hit ordered by rivals, a domestic killing tied to her divorce, or a federal cover-up to protect government secrets. None of them had proof, but each had an audience. In the end, rumor replaced record, and noise replaced truth. Even the system itself made sure silence stayed permanent. Data retention laws for corporate surveillance were voluntary. Unless companies chose to preserve footage, it could be deleted within months. By 2011, any chance of retrieving the original NexGrid footage was gone. Requests for federal cooperation were denied. The case didn't meet federal interest thresholds. Keller kept digging alone. In late 2014, a former NexGrid employee emailed him about one last liquidation batch, a shipment of old hardware and ceiling-mounted cameras sold at auction. Keller circled the line in red. If anything that vanished comes back, it'll be through junk. By the end of that year, San Jose replaced the old bridge lights along Almaden with bright LED lamps. The water beneath looked clearer, cleaner, quieter. But the truth stayed buried. The Vega file gathered dust in the archives, untouched since 2008. Until a year later, when a forgotten hard drive surfaced. And for the first time in 7 years, the silence began to break. It had been 11 years since Lauren Vega disappeared. By 2015, San Jose had changed. New tech, new skyline, new distractions. But one name still haunted the city's cold case files. That year, a maintenance worker named Miguel Soto bought a liquidation lot from an old storage auction. The boxes were stamped NexGrid Systems, the same company that had collapsed after Vega's death. Inside one rusted metal crate, he found camera mounts, server cables, and an old SCSE hard drive marked Main Lobby, May 2004. He almost threw it out. The drive didn't boot, just flashed. The first file showed Lauren leaving her office at 10:42 p.m. She was carrying her purse and a leather folder. She smiled briefly at the security guard before walking toward the exit. The timestamp matched the last known record from that night. The second file, labeled Gate 2201, was darker. A black SUV appeared from the opposite lane and stopped at the gate. Its headlights flared directly into the camera, drowning the frame in light. Lauren hesitated, shielding her eyes. A shadow crossed in front of the hood, and then the footage cut out. 3 minutes later, the entire camera system went dead. No sound, no license plate, just a reflection in the glass of a nearby billboard. FBI technicians ran frame-by-frame light reconstruction. They enhanced the pixels on the billboard that read, "NexGrid, secure the future." Under the glare, faint letters began to appear, 7C2-FX9. The number matched a vehicle registered to Vector Capital, a San Francisco investment firm. They were one of the biggest backers of Cygnus Technologies, NexGrid's main rival in the race for a Homeland Security cybersecurity contract. For the first time in 11 years, investigators had a physical link. Keller wrote in his logbook, "The car we've been chasing for a decade finally has a name." The timeline fell back into place. 10:42. Lauren leaves the office. 10:45. Her phone stops transmitting. 10:48. The SUV stops at the gate. 10:50 to 11:10. Estimated time of death. Everything fit. This wasn't random, Keller told the task force. Someone waited for her. When they pulled corporate employment records, one name surfaced: James Holler. He had worked as a driver and security contractor for Vector Capital between 2003 and 2006. He owned a Ford Expedition with a matching license plate sequence. His background included minor assault charges and private security contracts. In 2009, he vanished from California records completely. FBI agents contacted Vector Capital. The firm denied any connection to Holler and called the discovery a misunderstanding. But the recovered data told a different story. Inside the police department, the atmosphere was tense. Some officers doubted reopening a case that old. Files were missing, chain of custody records incomplete. But Keller pushed forward. "Distance doesn't erase fingerprints, just memory," he said. News spread fast. "The Firewall Queen case rebooted." That was the headline across Bay Area papers. Social media exploded. The hashtag hard drive case trended on Twitter for a week. Tech blogs dissected every frame, arguing over shadows and reflections. A popular podcast summed it up. The cameras she installed ended up catching her killer. Vector Capital went silent. Its PR team issued one sentence: "We are aware of the allegations and cooperating with authorities." By late 2015, FBI agents tracked Holler through old Social Security records. He was living under a fake name in Reno, Nevada, working as a night security guard for a warehouse company. They monitored his movements for 3 weeks. Then, in December, they made the arrest. It was 2 a.m. when the tactical team surrounded his car in the parking lot. Inside, they found a Ford Expedition keychain, scratched but original, marked 2004. When the agents cuffed him, Holler didn't fight. He just looked at the lead investigator and said, "I thought that tape was gone." That line went into the final report, the first real confession in a case buried by time, politics, and silence. By the end of that year, the story that started with a rusted... When agents cuffed him, Holler looked up and muttered, "I thought that tape was gone." The arrest sent Keller back into motion. He'd retired years earlier, but this was his case, the one that had followed him through every empty night. He flew to Reno and sat behind the two-way mirror, watching the man who had buried 12 years of silence. Across the glass, Haller looked calm, almost detached. He was thinner than his old security photo, hair gone gray at the sides. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes didn't move. The FBI laid out the evidence, the recovered video, the partial license plate, the payroll records from Vector Capital, and a paper trail connecting both to a private security firm called Fortify Solutions. Each item landed on the table one by one, quiet, deliberate, heavy. When they asked if he knew Lauren Vega, Haller shrugged. "I don't know that woman," he said. "I drove security routes, that's it." The agents didn't respond. They turned the laptop toward him and pressed play. The black SUV came into view, headlights flooding the NexGrid gate. Then they froze the frame and zoomed into the reflection on the sign, the faint code 7C2-FX9. Underneath the still image, Keller's old note appeared. License traced. Vector Capital Vehicle, 2004. For a few seconds, Haller didn't blink. Keller later wrote, "He stopped breathing, but he didn't blink." The second wave came with the money trail, a $15,000 wire transfer dated May 16, 2004, 2 days after Lauren's death. Sender, Fortify Solutions LLC, memo line, consulting, field assistance. The agents slid the printout across the table. "Consulting," one of them said. "You consult a lot of dead women, James?" Haller's jaw flexed. He stared at the paper, then at the cup of water in front of him. "It was a job," he said quietly. "Nothing personal." That was when Keller entered the room. He leaned forward, voice even. "Then tell me," he said, "what kind of job ends with a woman dead in a river?" Then came the story of that night. "She left late," Haller said. "Always did. I waited near the gate." He described the rain, the headlights, the moment she slowed down and saw him. "I just wanted to talk," he said, but she panicked. She reversed the car. He opened her door, shouting over the noise, telling her to calm down. "She kicked me. I lost it. My hand went to her neck. It happened too fast. When she stopped moving, everything went quiet." He sat there, not sure what to do. Then instinct took over. He moved her body into the passenger seat, drove to the bridge on Almaden Expressway, and pushed the Audi halfway off the edge. He released the handbrake and watched it roll into the dark water. "The current took it," he said. "I thought it was over." He dumped her phone and documents into the river. He drove home, showered, and waited for the news. When the confession was transcribed, Keller read it 3 times. He underlined one sentence. "They said she was messing with the wrong contract." That single line changed everything. It wasn't random. It was a corporate job. FBI analysts traced Fortify's invoices. $300,000 had been transferred from Vector Capital to Fortify 2 weeks before the murder. The transaction memo read, "Security Consultancy Retainer." When questioned, Vector's spokesperson released a statement. "Vector Capital maintains no involvement in or knowledge of the alleged criminal actions of any contractor." They denied hiring Fortify for anything related to NexGrid or Lauren Vega. Every trace of paperwork stopped one level short of proof. Keller wrote in his notes, "Everyone had their hands clean, because the dirt was paid for." The trial began that summer. The courtroom was packed with reporters. The headline read, "Silicon Valley's quietest murder comes to court." Haller sat motionless as prosecutors played the reconstructed video frame by frame. They showed the SUV at the gate, the reflection, the payment record, the taped confession. He didn't flinch. When asked to speak, Haller stood and said, "I never meant to kill her. I just..." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters called it the cleanest murder in Silicon Valley. CNN ran a special. A hit disguised as an accident, erased by technology, exposed by the very thing that built her legacy. Online, the case reignited debates about corporate ethics and cover-ups. People called it a cautionary tale, that in the tech world, power could make anything disappear, even the truth. Lauren's family released a statement. Justice doesn't mean peace. But at least the silence is broken. In the months that followed, Keller packed his case notes for the last time. He didn't feel closure, only the echo of unfinished names, missing emails, and the company that got away. He wrote one final line in his notebook. Truth is never clean. Not here. When Haller's prison gates closed behind him, it felt like the end of a story. But it wasn't. In Silicon Valley boardrooms, in newsrooms, in the offices of men who once shook Lauren's hand, the question still hung in the air. Who gave the order? Justice had come, but not the truth. And in Silicon Valley, sometimes those two never meet. June 2016, Santa Clara County Court. The verdict came at 3:42 p.m. James Haller, guilty of second-degree murder. Sentence, 30 years in federal prison. Inside the courtroom, Lauren's mother sat in silence, holding the same gray scarf her daughter wore the night she disappeared. Reporters rushed to file their stories. Headlines appeared within the hour. 12 years later, the river speaks. Outside, Detective Keller stepped into the sunlight. His face looked worn, tired, but still. When asked for comment, he said only, "Justice came late, but it came." Within days, every major outlet picked up the story. CNN ran a special. A hit disguised as an accident, erased by technology, revealed by it. The New York Times called it the cleanest murder in Silicon Valley. Online, the debate turned fierce. Was Lauren killed because of her upcoming federal cybersecurity contract, or because she was a woman who'd built too much power in a man's industry? Twitter and Reddit lit up with hashtag Justice for Lauren. One post went viral. She built firewalls for a living. In the end, someone found a way around hers. Two names were cleared that summer: Evan Pierce and Maya Chu. They had lived for 12 years under suspicion, whispers, and silence. On 60 Minutes, Evan said quietly, "We lived like ghosts in a story we didn't write." Maya, once accused of betrayal, returned to the tech world. She founded a cybersecurity startup led entirely by women. She named it Vectorless, a direct jab at the company tied to Lauren's death. Their interviews closed with one sentence that hit home. She was the target. We were the collateral. By September, the case had reached Washington. The Department of Homeland Security announced a new initiative, the Vega Security Fellowship, a $10 million fund supporting women and underrepresented engineers in cybersecurity. At the press event, the DHS spokesperson said, "Her legacy will protect others from the systems that failed her." Forbes published a feature titled, "From Victim to Vanguard, the Firewall Queen's Final Contribution." In October, Lauren's family returned to what was once the NexGrid headquarters. The building now housed freelancers and young developers, another startup hub built over the old one. They gathered in the courtyard where Lauren's old office once stood. Former employees, colleagues, even past rivals came to lay flowers. A software engineer who had worked under her spoke through tears. She built walls to protect people. She never thought she'd need one for herself. As dusk fell, the family walked to the riverbank where her car was found. They released white wreaths marked LV 2004. The surface of the Guadalupe River shimmered under the streetlights, the same lights that had once reflected off her Audi that night. Later that year, Keller sat for one last interview. He looked older now, voice low but steady. "She wasn't lost in the river," he said. "She was buried in the system." Technology buried her, and technology brought her back. The interviewer asked, "Do you believe justice was done?" Keller paused. "Justice, yes. Truth, not fully. But sometimes, that's all we get." That line became the closing quote in a dozen documentaries. The story didn't fade. Netflix greenlit a limited series, Firewall Queen, the Vega case. The Criminal Archive podcast dedicated 3 full episodes to it, breaking download records. Wired magazine closed their cover piece with a sentence that defined the era. "In a world built on secrets, the truth needs persistence more than intelligence." The tech industry took notice. Within months, major corporations launched The first Vega scholarship went to a young woman studying cybersecurity, a student who said she applied after watching the case documentary on TV. By the end of 2017, the headlines had quieted, but the impact remained. Inside every data center, every boardroom, and every policy memo, the case still lingered. For some, it was a tragedy. For others, a lesson. For Keller, it was unfinished business. Proof that even justice can feel incomplete. He ended his final interview the same way he'd closed his last report. It wasn't technology that solved it. It was persistence. And in that sentence, the story of Lauren Vega found its final clarity. Not about how she died, but about how her truth refused to stay buried. In 2018, California passed the Data Retention Act, quickly nicknamed the Vega Law. It required every company with a federal contract to keep digital surveillance footage for at least 10 years. The bill's opening line mentioned her by name. In recognition of Lauren Vega, whose case revealed the dangers of forgotten data. A story that began as loss ended as legislation. What once was silence now lived in state law. The Santa Clara Police Department followed suit. They built a new program, the Cold Case Digital Initiative, to recover data once marked corrupted. Old drives, half-broken servers, missing files, all were scanned again. By 2022, 28 arrests came from cases once thought unsolvable. A detective who trained under Keller said it best. Her case proved that memory isn't emotional. It's procedural. Silicon Valley took notice. Tech firms rewrote policies. Private security companies, like the one that once hired a killer, were placed under government review. Non-disclosure agreements were limited. Whistleblowers gained protection. At Stanford's ethics conference, a session was titled simply, "After Vega." The moderator asked the question that stayed with everyone. If one woman's death can make a law, What could honesty save? Her story no longer belonged to crime shows. True crime podcasts stopped asking who killed her. They asked why it took 12. That same year, a nonprofit launched Project Vega, an open-source archive for unsolved tech-linked crimes. The banner on its homepage reads, "Because truth shouldn't depend on who's willing to fund it." Within months, thousands of volunteers joined, scanning old files and digitizing forgotten cases. At the top corner of the site sits her photo from 2003, captioned simply, "The woman who made machines remember." On May 14, 2024, 20 years after her disappearance, people gathered by the Guadalupe River. They didn't hold signs. They stood in silence, holding their phones, each screen glowing with the same message. Remembering is justice. The lights reflected across the same water where her story began. Technology evolved, companies changed, but what truly shifted was belief that truth could outlast corruption, and that memory itself could be justice. Lauren Vega's story was no longer a mystery. It became a method. Justice isn't the end of a case. It's the start of remembering why it mattered. If this story moved you, share it. Comment your thoughts, subscribe for more untold cases, and help keep these stories alive. Because when we remember, justice continues.